In this video, what I'm going to do is go over how to fill out your project design planning sheet, which will be the ticket for you to be able to get your materials to be able to start building your projects. The projects themselves are going to require plans of some sort, so whether those are plans that you have created using something like Onshape or some other CAD program, or if this is a project that has a set of plans that we've come up with out of a magazine or something like that, either way you're going to need a set of plans. So in this case, for example, I'm going to be using the end table plans that we have here. This is a set of plans that I've designed. I can't complete the project designing planning sheet until I have my set of plans that show me how big each piece of my project is. And so you'll see I have my sheets, I have my overall, and I have the top, the legs, the longer stretchers, and the shorter stretchers. So this project only has 4 real pieces, you'll see. And then this bill of materials table right here is important, so it tells me how many of each piece that I actually need. Now, going through this, you'll see here in the instructions, you're going to use your CAD plans, and the first thing we have to do is calculate the finished board feet required. So that's the amount of material you're going to use. You're going to use the back of the sheet to show this. Okay, so right here is this table. This top part here for the finished parts, this is going to allow you to fill out what those sizes are and then calculate how many board feet each individual piece is, how many of them you need, and then what the final board feet requirement is for that particular part. Okay, so we'll go through, I'll show you how to fill those out. And then once we have that, we'll go back to the front part of the sheet, which is going to have these 3 boards listed on it. Most of our projects aren't going to take any more than that. We use a 5-inch board by default because that's the average width that most of our hardwoods come in. And we buy 10-foot pieces of material, so we have a 120 or 10-foot long board. We're going to use this where we're going to draw out where our individual finished pieces are going to come from. And that'll give an idea of how much actual material we need to get. From that, we take this back to this side of the page again, and you will fill out here which boards you need, what the length and width and thicknesses of them, and then you'll know what the board feet of the quantity of raw material you're going to need to be able to actually build this project. Now, keep in mind, when I issue materials, you will have to have this sheet filled out correctly, and I'll double check and make sure that it's right. When we actually get materials, I will base my material, what I give you, off of what you have here, but there may be some differences. If we have wider boards and I see ways that you could save material, we're going to go ahead and do that. But this is going to give us a basic outline of what we're going to need to be able to generate your project. So starting off, we're going to start with this part of the project on the back side of the planning sheet, and to start this, we're going to use these plans, and I'm going to go through and generate what this should look like. So we'll start here with the leg. It doesn't really matter which part you start with. I'm just going to start with the leg. So we fill this out. It's pretty simple. You're going to say, well, this is the leg. We're going to say, how long is the leg? Well, the leg is 19 1/4 inches, so we'll fill that out. How wide? Now my legs, they are 1 1/4 by 1 1/4, so the width and the thickness are the same, 1 1/4 inch and 1 1/4 inch. Now what you have to do is calculate how many board feet one of these legs is. And so the formula, I have it down here, it's length times width times thickness, all in inches, divided by 144, and that equals how many board feet of material that you need. So I'll be able to tell you from my math here, I know I need the actual board foot per leg is 0.21 board feet. I do need 4 of those, so that's going to give me a 0.84 board feet requirement for that part of my table. Okay, so just for an example, we'll go through one more. Let's see here. Let's do the longer stretcher that I have. And so again, we'll fill this out. Say long stretcher. And you want to make sure that you are filling this out and it's legible. Okay, so it is 13 1/2 inches long. It is 3 inches wide, and so you'll see I have a problem here. I don't have the dimensions, so I would need to go back into my Onshape and figure out what that size is. I happen to know it's 3 inches because I just did the drawing, but I would need to go back in and add that dimension. So it is 3 inches wide, and the thickness is 3/4 of an inch. So I fill out that. That equates to, when I do the formula, that's going to equate to, again, 0.21 board feet. It's kind of strange. It ended up with to be the same amount, even though completely different numbers. Okay, and so I need 2 of these. Okay, and again, you can figure out how many you need by looking at your bill of materials list. It tells you how many you need. Okay, so I'm going to go through that. That's going to give me a requirement of 0.42 board feet for this particular part. Now, the rest of my parts go through here just the same. So I have the short stretcher. Okay, and the short stretcher is 7.5 inches long, 7.5, 3 wide, 3/4 of an inch in thickness, and that comes out to a 0.12 board feet. I need 2 of them, so that's 0.24. And then finally the top, and the top is the one that is the biggest. And so if we look at here, you can see the top of my table was 18 inches by 12 inches by 3/4 of an inch. Now I'll tell you right now, we're not going to get a board that's that big. I'm going to have to glue multiple boards together in order to get to that size. So I'm going to have my top listed, and my top is 18 by 12 by 3/4 of an inch, and that equals 1.125 board feet, and I only need 1 of those, so 1.125. So adding all of this up tells me the total amount of board feet I need for my project, or the finished project, how much that's going to be. So if I add that all up, it's 2.625 board feet. So you just use your calculator and you figure that out. Now that I have this part figured out, I'm going to translate this into our pieces required for raw material. So on the other side of the page, you're going to take that information and we're going to lay out where our pieces for our project are going to go on these boards that I have. I default to a 5-inch width. That's a pretty average width of our boards when we get them. We get 120-inch or 10-foot long boards. So we're going to set this up effectively using these sizes. Now, when I give out material, you're going to be using this. You're going to have to bring this sheet to me, and I will look at what you have laid out, and if I can figure out a way to make it more efficient, I will, based on the material I have in the wood room. But this will give us a pretty good idea of how much material you're going to need and what pieces are going to come from what raw board. So finished board feet required, so we get that off the back of the sheet, and we found that was 2.625 was how many board feet we needed for the finished project. Raw board feet required, we'll figure that after we figure out how many of these pieces we're going to need. Going through this, it's pretty simple. You're going to use your plans, and you're going to take the plans that you have and look at their sizes of each piece so that you can see what you need. So we'll start with the table leg. If we look at the leg, it's pretty simple. The leg is 19.25 inches long, and it's a 1.25 by 1.25. Okay, so on here you'll see for our planning purposes we're actually going to add 1 inch to the length and 1/2 inch to the overall width. So that brings us to, for each leg, it's going to be 20 1/4 inch long. And then because we're going to have to do each leg out of 2 pieces of material glued together, we're going to need 2 pieces that are 1 3/4 inches wide. Okay, so that'll make sure that when we glue those together, we'll have enough material to end up with 1 1/4 by 1 1/4 material. So we sort of estimate here, we have a 1 3/4 inch width that we need, and we know we need 20 1/4. So this doesn't have to be exact, but we know that it's going to be right about here. So kind of halfway in between there. And we'll say 1 3/4 and 1 3/4, and this will be leg 1, and we're going to need another one at that length. And so it's good to, you want to go ahead and write your number up there. Okay, and so we're going to need 2 of these leg 1s because we're going to glue those 2 pieces together. Now we're going to do the same thing for leg 2, so we have to add another 20 1/4, so that's going to take us to 40 1/2. So we come up here, and that's going to be about right here, so that's 40 1/2. And this is another, this is 20 1/4. This is also going to be 20 1/4, so we want to label that. And we come in here and we know it's the same thickness, so this is going to be leg 2 and this will be leg 2. Same thing again, so we add another 20 1/4. That's 60 3/4 of an inch, so it's right about here. So 60 3/4, that's a 20 1/4 inch measurement. There's leg 3 and leg 3. And then the last leg we're going to do another 20 1/4, so that's going to take us to 81. That'll be right about in here. We'll say 81, so it's a 20 1/4 length. And again, this will be leg number 4 and leg number 4. So that gives us a visual. These are the pieces we need to make for our legs. Now we move on to our other pieces. We're going to go ahead and use the long stretcher next. So if we look at our plans, we have a 13.5 by 3 inch piece. So adding an inch, that's 14.5, and then we're going to have 3.5 inches on the width. So 14.5, we add that to the 81. We're going to end up right at, so let's see, 95.5. So we'll just be right about here. 95 1/2, and it's going to be 3 inches wide, so we're going to do this, and so this has to be 14 1/2. We want to make sure we're labeling again, and this is going to be 3.5 so that we have enough width, and this will be stretcher 1. Now you're going to need 2 of these, but we don't have enough. A 3.5 inch board out of a 5 isn't going to work, so we have to do the same thing, another 14.5, which will take us to 110 inches. So we'll be here, it's 110, this is a 14.5, and this will be stretcher 2. Actually, we should make sure we label this as long stretcher. That way we make sure that we know the long ones from the short ones. Okay, now the last little bit, we have 10 inches left, which means that we can actually get one of our short stretchers out of that part. Okay, so the short stretcher is only 7.5 inches, and so we'll need technically 8, and then 2 inches, or 3 inches, sorry, tall, and so then another 3.5. So we're going to do that short stretcher. That's going to be 8.5, and it'll still be 3. So this is a short stretcher. Okay, and it technically goes out to 118.5. So we'll list that, but when we actually cut this, we won't bother cutting off that extra because there's really no reason to. Plus, to work with the machines, you're actually going to want to have that board a little bit longer anyway. So our next step is to go ahead and get our second board, so we need another stretcher. So we're going to go through and we're going to say, okay, we have 3.5 inch wide, and this time it's another one of these short guys, so it's 8.5. So we'll go, that's about right here, 8.5. Label this as an 8.5, and about that. This is our short stretcher. So now we have all of the framework material for the actual table, so the legs and the frame. Next is the top. The top is 12 by 18, and there's not any boards that we're going to have. It's very unlikely that we'll have boards that are going to be 12 inches wide, so we're going to have to glue these together. Typically I will likely have enough material that's wide that we might be able to use only 2 boards, but because we're using default of 5 inches, we're actually going to need to have 3 boards to make this up. So we're going to be ending up with a 19 by 12.5 inch total piece. So we're just going to use the full 5 inch width because we know that we're going to be trimming this down anyway. And so it's going to be 19 inches long. So if we look at this, we add 19 to our 8.5, it's going to go to 27.5 inches. So that's about right here, 27.5. This is the top. We're going to use the full width, and we're just going to write in here that's going to be our 19 inch size. Another 19 inches is going to take us to 46.5, so that's going to be about here, 46.5, so that's a 19 top. And then lastly, we're going to go through, and the last one will be at 65.5, so about here. That's a 19, and that is our top. So these three pieces will end up making up our top. So this lays out and tells us how much material we actually need and how many sticks. So you're going to see you're going to have about, if I use 5-inch wide boards for all of this, I'm going to have about 15 feet, just a little over 15 feet of raw material that I'm going to be using. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take this information and we're going to calculate what that raw board foot is. So that'll tell us kind of how much waste we're having, because I say all of these pieces here, these are all waste pieces that we can't use in our project. Again, like I said, when you bring this to me, you filled it out, I'm going to do my best to minimize that waste. So I might have boards that are slightly wider, and I look at how you have it set up, and I'll be able to do a better job on that. So to do this part of it, we'll get back to the back side of our board, or of our piece, and you're going to take and fill out the information. So we're going to have this one. This board here has the legs, and that's good enough. We know it also has some stretchers. We know that the length of this is going to be 118.5 inches, and it's 5 inches wide, and the thickness is going to be 3/4. We're not going to factor in any thickness loss at this point. Okay, and so we do the math on that, length, width, thickness, time, I'll multiply those, divided by 144, and our board feet usage of this is 3.08 board feet. Then the second one, this is going to have our tops on it, and that one's only going to be 65.5 inches. And it's again 5 inches wide and 3/4, and that's going to be 1.7 board feet. And so if we do the math, you're going to see that we have 4.78 board feet required total of raw material. And then we look at it, that's about just over a board foot of waste. Which again is something that we're going to try to minimize. We're going to have to go through and look at how we cut these out. We should be able to find boards that are going to make the top way more efficient. If I can get the top out of 2 boards, that'll help cut that waste number quite a bit down. So that's how you fill out your material usage sheet, or your material planning sheet. You have to have this completed all the way done before I will hand out material to you. So when you want material, you're going to have to bring me this page and all of your plans, and then I'll double check that everything is good, and then I'll be able to issue you material.